Yeah, well, we'll hear from you what type of portals or accessibility options there are for people like us who could contribute that, and we'll add that to the description specifically for this case. But I do want to change the discussion again just to one of the last topics I want to talk about, where in 2016 you wrote an article called "Why I Was Wrong About Christianity" for the New Statesman, which is a very interesting discussion, talking about the influence that Christianity had in the development of many societies, but also among them the one we talked about in the Western society. Previously, you thought that Western values were derived from Greece and Rome, and you kind of didn't really own anything to Christianity. The context within the values that Greece and Rome perpetuated were Christianized, and therefore that's where the values came from. But you've since had a change of heart. Could you explain why you think it became core from Christianity rather than principles that already existed in Greece and Rome before Christianity?
Well, so I was writing books about Greece and particularly Rome,
Mm,
and actually it was on the most basic level that because I was writing in English,
mm,
a European language, um, I found so many of the words that I wanted to use inadequate to sum up the world that I was describing. So words like religion, secular, homosexuality, science, I mean, all kinds of words were carried a kind of a freight that risked becoming anachronistic.
mm,
And I kept thinking, well, why? What has changed? And the more I thought about it, the more I came to realize that essentially um, the impact of Christianity was so manifest that to speak English was, in a sense, to Christianize yourself.
okay.
That that the weight of signification that English words have are so shaped by Christianity that it can be almost impossible to apply them to pre-Christian civilizations.
Mm,
And the more I thought about that, the more I came to see that when I look back at Greece or Rome, it was like trying to peer through a kind of dust haze.
mm,
And that dust haze was made up of kind of tiny little Christian particles.
mm,
I could kind of dimly make out the lineaments, but it was a real effort to try and to get rid of them. Um, and I wanted so the article, what had I got wrong, was basically I hadn't realised how Christian I was.
okay.
Had not realised how Christian I was in my assumptions, in my attitudes, in my morals, in the most basic way that I understood and saw the world. So I'll give you an example, which is a word that might seem impeccably Greek and have nothing to do with Christianity, which is democracy.
Mm,
So people say,
yes.
it's people power.
Yeah.
That's how it's translated.
Mm.
And so people
History
look
in
back.
Athens. It's very
Yes.
Greek.
So it's it comes, associated with Athens in the late sixth, fifth, fourth centuries BC in Greece, and we assume that there's a continuity between the democracy practiced by the Athenians and the democracy that we have in the modern world. And so we look back at ancient Greece and we say, but what about the slaves? What about the foreigners? What about the women? They didn't have a vote, so therefore it couldn't really be a democracy.
Mm,
And in doing that, we are assuming that the Athenian democracy was founded on certain principles, namely that everyone has a kind of right to they have rights, that's what underpins democracy, your
mm,
democratic right to a vote. And that's the
right.
logic that in 20th century meant that women were given the
Mm,
right to vote. It's what underpinned, obviously in South Africa, the extension of the franchise to everyone in South
yes.
Africa. There is no slave or free, there is no Greek or Jew, there is no man or woman, there is no black or white. Everyone is equal. This is a Christian perspective.
Mm,
It's founded on the idea that all human beings have a fundamental dignity. But that's not what democracy in Athens was about. It's not the founding
right.
principle. actually, it's better to think of it as the power of the demos. And what is the demos? The demos to the Athenians is the sum of people who are sprung from the soil of Attica
Mm.
in the present, in the past, and in the future. And they have a sacral bond to the earth that has given them birth and to the gods that look after them. And everybody who belongs to that demos has a role to play. And the role of men is to fight and to legislate. So that's why they have their votes. That's why they sit in the assembly. That's why women don't go. But women also have their role, which is to mediate above with the gods and above all with the goddess Athena, who gives her name to the city of Athens. And for the Athenians, that's just as important as sitting in the assembly, perhaps even more important. And so the premise that we bring as people shaped by Christianity is one that struggles massively, massively to come to terms with that, because we don't think to look at it in those terms. And so we sit in judgment on the Athenians for denying women or slaves the vote. But to the Athenians, it would have seemed perfectly obvious why they were doing that. But you have to think yourself back into a pre-Christian frame of mind properly to get that. And it's that degree of effort, because I think, to be honest, one of the things that being kind of globally hegemonic as Europeans have been, and perhaps particularly if you're an English speaker from Britain or from America, you've had 2 centuries of being able to assume that your values and your ideals and the way that you see the world is just the natural order of things. That's just the way things are. I think that as Western power retreats, that becomes less and less the case. I think that more and more we in the West will come to understand that our way of seeing the world is just one way of many different ways, and that actually, our values, our assumptions, our ideals are very, very contingent, culturally contingent. But I think that for the past 2 centuries, that's been, we've been able to coast by, assuming that the way that we see the world is just the way things are. And I don't think that's the case. And I think that in our essence, the way that we see the world is shaped above all by Christianity. And that doesn't mean that you have to believe in God, doesn't mean you have to go to church, doesn't mean that you even have to really know anything at all about Christianity. But it does mean that it's kind of like, those particles of dust that I talked about, that you just breathe them in, and you may not even realize that you're breathing them in, but there they are. It's part of the oxygen that you're breathing in.
Is it then fundamentally in the same way that Christianity seems to be quite shrinking in terms of Western society as a popular, methodology, way of thinking, religious perspective? Is that the same way connected to a way that the Western way of thinking is this is just the way that the world works is also shrinking, and perhaps even more of a different world's perspective, whether that be African or Eastern hemisphere? Is that also the reason why they might be gaining?
No, I think Christianity isn't shrinking globally.
Okay.
I mean, in Africa, it's spread like wildfire.
Right.
Since the 50s. I mean, its growth has been of an astonishing rate, and it's spreading like wildfire in parts of Asia. And I use wildfire because the fastest growing denomination of Christianity of all is Pentecostalism. And Pentecostal, it's the fire of Pentecost, the fire of the Spirit coming down. It's that idea of kind of living fire spreading around the world. Very, very important and transformative. It's along with radical Islam, Pentecostalism is the great transformative 21st century kind of cultural movement. But I think in the West, in the West, definitely there's the feeling that it's shrinking because more and more people kind of define themselves as being not just post-Christian but anti-Christian. But I think that the kind of strident atheism that we see often in the West is just another form of kind of Christianity. It's a logical endpoint for the campaign that Christianity has always embodied against what it casts as superstition, against idolatry, against the belief that there's the divine in shrubs or springs or mountaintops or whatever, that ultimately goes back to the Hebrew prophets. That conviction that you should get rid of superstition ultimately has turned on Christianity itself, but it's bred of Christian assumptions, I think. And so that means that essentially the West remains absolutely shot through with a Christian way of seeing the world. because the things that it doesn't believe in are very Christian things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
And so
exactly.
therefore, you can be shaped by what you lack. That can define you. And I think that what we lack and what we reject is Christian, and so therefore we remain defined by it.
No, exactly. Okay, yeah. That's a very interesting perspective. I never actually thought about the one actually causing the other one and the way in which it's connected. So thank you so much for sharing that for us. I was just want to give you a last opportunity if there's anything you wanted to share, anything you wanted to plug.
Well, I mentioned the walk that I did for the Yazidis, and I play for a cricket team
Mm,
here in England, and in county cricket here, a player after 10 years gets a benefit, and they all over the course of the season they raise money, and then they can keep the money to kind of tide them over into retirement.
mm,
I've played for this team for 10 years, so I've been given a benefit, but my benefit is we're raising money for the Yazidis and for various homeless charities, and if anyone wanted to contribute to that, I would, be absolutely delighted. I think it's such a kind of wonderful cause. So that's that's what I'd like to plug, since you've
yeah.
given me the opportunity. So thank you for that.
No, of course, and thank you so much. We're definitely going to add that in the description and encourage people to go and look at that as well. But just for your side, I just want to thank you so much. This has been so interesting. It's always kind of funny. It's only after the point that history has repeated itself that people seem to want to go listen to historians. So I want to bring out the perspective that we should rather listen to you before it repeats itself. So in that regard, thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us. And just to our viewers, I just want to say, if you've made it thus far in the video, you most definitely have liked the video. So please, by all means, like and share this video to share Tom's perspective on the world and his historical expertise. You're more than welcome to check out some of the books that we'll have in the description as well. So thank you so much for watching. This has been WorldView.